Graves of the Unnamed Soldiers. In the summer of 1921, the war had been over for nearly 3 years, but Europe had not healed. The fields where millions had once fought were now quiet, yet beneath the soil lay reminders that refused to fade. Across Verdun, workers and soldiers were still uncovering bones, remains of men who had vanished into the chaos of the World War I, never identified, never returned home. Lieutenant Daniel Mercer had come to France for a task he did not want. He was an officer in the British Army, but this assignment was different. There would be no battles, no commands shouted over gunfire. Instead, he had been ordered to assist in the identification and burial of unknown soldiers, men whose names had been lost somewhere between the trenches and the explosions. Daniel had survived the war. That alone made him feel like a stranger among the dead. The train carried him through the scarred countryside, past villages that had been rebuilt but still carried the memory of destruction. When he arrived at the site near Verdun, he was greeted not by soldiers, but by silence. Rows of temporary graves stretched across the land, each marked with a simple wooden cross. Some bore names. Many did not. A man approached him, older, his uniform worn but neat. "Lieutenant Mercer?" he asked. "Yes." "I'm Captain Henri Laurent," he said. "We've been expecting you." Laurent was French, but his English was precise. He had remained here after the war, overseeing recovery efforts. For him, the war hadn't ended in 1918, it had simply changed form. They walked together through the field. "Every week, we find more," Laurent said quietly. "Farmers ploughing their land. Workers repairing roads. Sometimes entire groups, buried where they fell." Daniel looked at the crosses. "And you identify them?" "When we can," Laurent replied. "But most, we cannot." That was why Daniel had been sent. His role was to assist in the process, examining uniforms, personal items, anything that might reveal a name. It was careful, methodical work. But it was also deeply human. The next morning, Daniel joined a team of laborers soldiers at a newly discovered site. Daniel forced himself to focus. Each set of remains was treated with respect. Items were catalogued: buttons, fragments of cloth, rusted perchance tags when they existed. Sometimes there were letters, folded and preserved by chance. Sometimes nothing at all. One body, however, caught Daniel's attention. The soldier lay slightly apart from the others, his remains more intact. Around his neck was a small metal case. Daniel carefully opened it. Inside was a photograph. A woman and a child. No name. No writing. Just an image of a life that had continued without him. Daniel stared at it longer than he should have. "We'll try to identify him," he said quietly. Laurent nodded, but his expression suggested he had heard those words many times before. Days turned into weeks. Daniel worked tirelessly, determined to give as many of the dead their names back as possible. But the reality was unforgiving. Time, weather, and El Harbo had erased most traces of identity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel sat near the kuburin of the unidentified soldier with the photograph. He turned the image over in his hands, as if hoping something might appear. "Do you think it matters?" he asked suddenly. Laurent, standing nearby, looked at him. "What do you mean?" "If we find their names," Daniel said, "after all this time, does it change anything?" Laurent considered the question. "Not for them," he said. "But for the living, it means everything." Daniel wasn't sure he believed that. A few days later, a dustman was announced. From the countless unidentified remains across the former battlefields, one would be chosen to represent all unknown soldiers. That body would be buried with full honors, a symbol for every family that never received closure. The selection process was meant to be random, impartial. But to Daniel, it didn't feel that simple. On the day of the selection, several unidentified soldiers were placed in identical coffins. A junior officer, chosen for his neutrality, was asked to pick one without knowing anything about those within. Daniel stood among the witnesses, his gaze fixed on the coffins. He thought of the photograph, of the thousands of stories buried beneath the Lorde, of the names that would never be spoken again. The officer stepped forward and made his choice. The chosen coffin would later be transported to Britain, where it would be buried in Westminster Abbey as the unknown warrior, a single grave representing millions. The ceremony was grand, filled with ihtiromen and silence. But Daniel could not shake the feeling that something had been left behind. Because for every soldier honored, thousands remained unnamed. Before leaving France, Daniel returned to the grave of the soldier with the photograph. Identification had failed. No records matched. No family had been found. He placed the photograph back into the metal case and sealed it carefully. Then he did something simple. He marked the grave himself. Not with a name, he did not have one, but with words. Known unto love. It wasn't official. It wouldn't appear in records. But it felt right. Years passed. Daniel left the army, built a quiet life, and tried to move forward. But the memories never truly left him. The faces, the graves, the silence, they stayed. Decades later, as another war loomed over Europe, he found himself thinking again of those fields in France, of the unnamed soldiers, of the stories buried with them. History, he realized, had a way of repeating itself. But so did remembrance. Today, across former battlefields, there are still graves marked only with words like a soldier of the Great War or known unto God. They stand as reminders, not of victory or defeat, but of the human cost of conflict. Because not every soldier returns home. And not every story is remembered by name. But that does not mean they are forgotten.